Yes, your MC's getting a little punchy at this point. He's been here. He's been in Pinehurst for a week. And I don't golf. I don't golf and I don't eat meat. And I don't drink. What the hell has he been doing for a week? is actually the question, right? Yes, here we go. Testing. A couple of quick reminders. Again, we're going to be doing this in Austin in early October, October 3rd through the 6th. 2nd through the 5th. And that's going to be a Sunday to Wednesday span, right?
It's actually a Wednesday to Saturday, and it leads right into Austin City Limits.
Oh, that's right. That's the music festival. So come for the music festival, visit us first. And I'm always looking for ideas. So, and again, as I mentioned the other day, I really am looking for more cases, more examples of people at work and where they're making money. Also, again, we're going to be posting videos. The videos for everything that happened on stage here will be online shortly, probably by Monday. We'll be doing follow-up emails that'll give you some video highlights. Thanks, while I have you here, thanks to everybody who participated. I loved yesterday. I loved having everybody talking back and forth on and off stage. That's the perfect vibe for this event, what we really aim for. And of course, feel free to do it now. I know Eric and Freddie don't mind being interrupted. And special thanks to Eric, Freddie, and Nick, who are presenting today. I understand we got a light crowd. I really appreciate the effort they put in this. You will be able to see all of their stuff. People who aren't here will be able to see all their stuff online shortly. With that, let me introduce, as I said, returning champion Eric Meyer. He has presented here several times. He is now...
Walk-up music.
Yeah, that's right. Where's the walk-up music?
Thunderstruck or something.
Fluff the pillows, made the bed, stacked the chairs up, folded your nightgown.
He is now the president of Belo Media Group. Before that, many years at Cox, where he came here. He is famous for his blunt and candid insights into the industry, as well as killer prezos. So please welcome back Eric Meyer.
Uh-oh. I already passed one. Okay. Could you put that up on your site? Hey guys, Eric Myers. I've actually only been at Belo Media Group for about 90 days, so it seems a little odd speaking on this topic, so I'll keep pretty general. I've been working with Belo for more than a decade. Amongst many of the big metro publishers, we've kind of set up groups to discuss business, where we're going in the new future. We deal with the same issues, and so not unlike a room like this, maybe slightly bigger, we spend a lot of time ideating on what's the staff look like if you're going down this model of truly trying to be a digital agency like everyone in the publishing world basically says they are. Where's the expense? Do you buy? Do you partner your build? And that's what I'll set up today. Where we find that it works at Cox, I did this for about a decade, and we found kind of obviously how many things did not work, how many things did work to be truly client first. I tried to stick with a Marvel theme to keep relevant, so my designers enjoyed building the presentation, because they're all Marvel heads, as am my daughter and I. Protecting our clients and serving our audience. I say that because we talk a lot about inside politics in the publishing world, about where our expenses lie, where our revenue streams are, and it seems so simplistic, but how many times we start to fade away from actually asking the client what they want us to be as a large local publisher. And so it's a mantra that sounds simplistic, but I find it can redirect conversations quite a bit while we're talking about investments. Obviously, everyone wants to be omnichannel. If you're going to have a sales force, if you're going to have a highly compensated sales force, you need them to walk out the door and the clients to feel like they're helping them solve problems, not selling your product. Again, we've been talking about that in the industry for quite some time, but I think you have to actually invest. You need to not just say it, but you need to follow through on talent. You need to buy, partner, build, and we'll talk about that. At Belo Media Group, and one of the reasons that I'm there now, is they actually have a M&A team that sits in my office fairly frequently, every couple of weeks, and asks, should we buy into this space? Should we partner with someone and build a team to support that partnership? Or should we try to build it from the ground up? Pretty cool organization. They started to purchase small digital service agencies around Texas probably about 5 or 6 years ago. As they got out of the broadcast space and as they got out of some of the smaller newspapers, they reinvested a lot of that money. I say that because a lot of publishers put that to the bottom line. Been incredibly happy with what Bilo Media Group has been willing to do to take care of that ultimate client. These are kind of brands. Dallas Morning News is the oldest, this is an interesting tidbit. You've heard about old newspaper business. Dallas Morning News is actually the oldest business in Texas, constantly running. Not from Texas. I realize what that means. And there's a pride factor to be at the oldest company in a state like Texas, which has a lot of pride. But as we all know, coming from a newspaper and trying to go deep into a new digital world over the course of the last 20 years, that can turn off at least 30% of the potential clients, as they do not want to be talking strategy with an old newspaper group. On the other hand, in Dallas, Texas, there's another third that you can walk in the door and get the business because of that history. So it's an interesting balance of how we need to go to market with our brand to make sure that we truly are delivering in this new space. Bilo Media Group is just that. That's taking all of our assets and rolling it under basically for that exact reason. We all do it in the media world, try to get away from that brand name because of some of the problems with it. However, then the challenges are, what exactly are you and what is a Bilo, which we deal with a lot. Bilo & Company is basically the holding organization where we've put all the digital assets that had different names. Distribuon is a marketing platform, SaaS, built by one of the team members at our organization. We've actually purchased that business from him, and he is still working there. That's license-based, going to a large organization that needs to do turnkey marketing solutions, like a large financial group that has advisors all over the world. It can scale to that fairly easily. Marketing Effects, Tchotchke's print and promo organization. Vertical Nerve is one of the multiple digital service agencies that Bilo Media Group has purchased. And we're trying to organize all these brands. Nobody knows what all that means. Obviously, that's our challenge. And so we spend quite a bit of time. How do we go to market? What's relevant? And unlike previous, where you made one decision and went with it, we're becoming incredibly flexible based on what we think our clients want us to be. So packing our utility belt, we know that we have to be in every part of the space if we're going to be relevant. If I'm actually have a sales force that I believe is the best sales force in a marketplace, I don't want them to turn away from any business if at all possible. And that's where it gets into the margin issue. How many people do you need? Can you have an evergreen staff that can handle that? But more importantly, I think, is can you own the beginning part of the sales funnel? And so I'm pretty adamant about this, and I actually just did a discussion with a bunch of consultants a couple days ago when I first got here for 2 hours on this topic of what should we own, what should we buy, what should we get rid of, type of a discussion. What do we need to be in? And I'm very bullish on getting way into strategy, creative, and getting the cash flow coming through our organization, helping our clients long before they're ready to do a media plan. And as a large media company, that can be an interesting space. Cubic Creative, little agency in Tulsa, Oklahoma, really cool, amazing team. We just purchased in April, and we're keeping it as a standalone brand. They have an incredible space in the travel tourism. They take care of a lot of economic development teams at cities across the country. So they play very heavily in that space. We don't really step on each other's toes. And then they help us on the advertising sales side have a little bit more relevant conversations earlier on in the process. Pretty cool. I can do this all day is my tip to fulfillment. So everybody has almost all of these products at all times. Differentiating yourselves in the space, as the handful of publishers that are out here today know, it's can you deliver on it? And so we have to make sure that we have world-class QA. I'm bullish about that as well, so that whether we partner or whether it's our own product sets, we have the respect of the vendor as well. I find that often large traditional media organizations such as ourselves will work with really smart partners like those in the room, and we'll make you deal with someone on my team who knows nothing about what you're talking about. And I think that's a failure as well. So making sure that we own QA and strategy, not only on our own product sets, but that we give you the right connectivity at our organization so that we can have relevant conversations and so that you feel you're giving us your best product sets or solutions. So we spend quite a bit of time working on that. At Cox, we did that, and we're deep into it at Belo Media Group right now. Obviously, not telling you anything you don't know, but I want all of my account executives to show up with, at the bare minimum, these opportunities for their clients, and because of that, we need to invest quite a bit. I use a discussion either 2 for 1 or 3 for 1. So whatever the reason is, as 2 to 3 people leave our organization, don't replace them with 2 to 3 more people, because that's just not how it works anymore from a financial standpoint. Replace them with one of the best in the business at something in particular. So we're really specializing in some cases. A lot of people at a traditional media organization, I notice they're so worried about keeping their head count at the same head count, they tend to never get competitive. If you cannot hire someone from one of the platforms because you don't pay enough, then I don't think you're really trying to compete in the digital space at a local level. So we know what they pay. I know what the 2 big guys pay in a local marketplace. We make sure that we can pay the same or better than that, and then have the added benefit of a very cool traditional organization with great benefits, good place to live, et cetera. So that's a real conversation. It's a candid conversation we have every day, and it's done well for us. So what we look for is when a client walks through our organization, I want them to say, this is not what I expected to see. Meaning the type of people, the intelligence, the way the rooms look across the board. And we spend quite a bit of time in that space. This is one of my favorite orgs that we've invested in. It's called eSite Analytics. Everybody's into discussing data, or you're supposed to say big data quite a bit, I realize. What I like about this team is that many people can purchase data. He spends millions of dollars at the beginning of the year on data so that he has enough data to share with our clients, and he has to refresh that at least once a year, if not multiple times a month, depending on what he's looking for. But what I like about this team is it's a bunch of really, really sharp MBAs that were all out in the consulting space at big business around the world traveling, and he's brought them all into this team. So it's really about the insights that they deliver with the data that I find incredibly interesting, and I think it gives us a right to win early on in the discussion with clients, long before we're discussing purchasing advertising, buying search, managing SEO, having an intelligent content strategy for the org. But there's a why there, and we feel pretty confident in the insights he gives us. And he's got the added benefit of having some cool design. That's actually one of his maps. But he's got nice looking maps, good looking presentation, but it's really about the brain power that he's hired with that team. And they show up pretty strong. All of that being said, we can't walk away from owned and operated. And we own great page views, great content. We're incredibly relevant to a local marketplace. How many people are buying IO direct, right? Well, what's interesting about our org, I'm not going to give you exact numbers, but let's say it's $100 million in ad revenue in Dallas at our org. 2 million of that is indirect digital. 30 million of it is direct digital, and the rest is events, print, et cetera. And so we cannot live on indirect by any means, and so it's a pretty significant amount of hustle to make sure not only do we have the products, but the staff to support that. In the owned and operated space, instead of having a sales force that's still trying to sell $8 CPMs on a 300 by 250 above the fold, we really try to tie our owned and operated media into almost media events, so calendarizing the year, utilizing some of that good old journalistic practice of knowing what your editorial calendar is, and then upgrading it into what we call small J journalism that is ad friendly and selling sponsorship against that, both on the owned and operated site, but actually investing in those events. And so we hold small events throughout the year that are tied to our digital buy. It gives us a little bit of a separation from just being able to buy us through a DSP transaction because we do not offer that level of service programmatically. So that tends to work pretty well to get the value up, but more importantly, to stay client-focused, they find it to be quite important to be connected to our brand in that way. We find that we can still win in that space. I already mentioned building a decent team, and again, you really have to think, if you're going to compete in this space, you really have to be willing to invest in it, and you have to make hard decisions in other parts of the company. Again, I think that's pretty logical, but I find that a lot of publishers are not willing to make that risk and truly try to be the best in a marketplace. Redundant, the preconceptions I mentioned, when you're more than 130 years old, newspaper, you really have to get out there and market yourselves with this new team, or else the phone's not going to ring, right? And so for them to hit these large ad numbers, they have to practice. We have to bring them in. We have to show them our labs. We have to show them the data that we have so that they trust us. And so we spend a decent amount of time there. We're propping up a pretty big B2B team to make sure that we can communicate directly to the client long before we show up to talk to them, and we have found that works quite a bit. But we invest in that space as well. In the org, we've talked about it a little bit. Tobias did a talk a week ago in DC, this whole discussion about membership, which is our fancier term for subscriptions, basically. Can you have that balance of making money in that space where there's still, for many organizations, they're getting double-digit growth in membership or in subs, they're having declining ad revenues, but without walking away from advertising? How do you match this beautiful balance so that you're getting both revenue streams? And so we kind of are starting to meld it, that membership mentality means any good client that cares about our organization or any good reader that's willing to pay, those are both our members. So we actually do events for both of them. We get them together. We give them VIP experiences through our assets, whether that's large sporting contracts and bringing them into suites, but melding this concept that members get to hang out together in a city like Dallas where that matters. Networking's pretty big there. Business is a sport, as it's often described in Dallas. And we've been able to meld that fairly well, and we're gonna try to double down on that over the course of the next year. It's fun to think that way. It's also obviously UX matters, we're all in the same room. I think it can get pretty unhealthy when the debate goes, okay, advertising's unattractive, we don't want it on our site anymore, this is all about our subscriber, and you slowly realize that that's not an evergreen model either. And so just making sure everybody's in the room, having the discussion, how's the site look, what are we making the decisions on? Is volume most important, or is time of engagement more important? And I think the answer is it's a little bit of all of it. And so we try to make sure that that balance occurs from the beginning. And that's just a build on that thought process. But we want to take care of our audience, but taking care of our audience means a very close relationship between volume so we can monetize it, advertising, and experiential so that the members are willing to pay decent subscription rates and sustainable. So big discussion in our organization. That's fairly obvious that it's a cool slide, but we talk about that a lot too. I think at a big publishing company, so much of what you talk about is so you-focused. And I just kind of have this discussion that every day is a new day in our world. And you have to have a team that is able to adapt and adopt new concepts. We really push the thought process that if you're hiring someone, that their job description needs to be about a third open. Kind of gone are the days where it's siloed organization. Everyone uses the word matrix, but I find that most organizations, especially traditional publishers, stay incredibly hierarchical. If you have somebody smart and they're good at events, they need to support events for our whole company. This is not owned by one division. This is not owned. And so we push that concept pretty hard. It sounds, again, fairly logical, easier said than done sometimes. And that's pretty much a wrap, but I had to finish off that there is no end game, and that's the same concept. Is we don't think there's a point B that it's going to be the perfect revenue stream in 2020. We're really operating that it's a hustle every day. we want to see digital revenues cover print revenues within the next 3 years, which I think we can do, and not just because print revenues fell. And so when we wake in the morning, there is a real, I call it appropriate sense of panic, not in a negative way, but in more of a hustle. So that's my wrap, and I really hope that a couple people ask me questions, because one thing I do love about this conference, I think this might be either the third or fourth time I've spoken here, is if I walk away with 1 or 2 new partners, that's a successful conference to me, or 1 or 2 more connections in the publishing world that we can ideate after it's over. So I definitely look forward to that. Thanks, man.
Eric, as always, thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Guys, you got a couple of follow-ups?
Yeah. Yep.
Do you ever worry or feel or like have that boundary of when you like think that you're going so far over market rate for somebody that it's like awkward, or you're prepared to do it because you're so confident you want that person? Like, because often. Hi. Like we have that issue. You know, someone comes along and says, "This is my price." You think they're that great, but you worry that you're like either being, you know, conned or you're actually getting super talent.
Yeah, obviously that is a concern, because it's in some cases double to 2.5x what we're maybe currently paying. And so yeah, we have that debate all the time. I'm willing to take the risk. And so I'm also willing to make sure my leadership team's comfortable in, if that was a sales job, that they don't stay around too long. And you can get to that when they ask for that level of salary and comp, you can pay pretty close attention and figure that out sooner than later. And the beauty about ad revenues is they're either bringing them in or they are not. And so it's a pretty black and white when it comes to that side. On more of the QA and the strategy side, that you can usually get a pretty specific track record of the jobs that they've held and know based on accomplishments. We make sure we do pretty serious vetting. We do at least 1 personality test during the very beginning part of the interview process before our leadership team will meet with that person. We have about a 20 to 30 page document on the person, regardless of the level of position, and then it's benchmarked against other high performers in that space. So we have it for strategy jobs, we have it for revenue producing jobs, and then kind of traditional operational jobs, and then obviously on the content side as well. So we think we eliminate some of the risk, but you don't always eliminate the risk. So.
Who are you competing with, and who are you not competing with? When you go into market, how do you make sure that
yeah,
you're
we
not
talk about that all the time.
colliding with your own clients?
Yeah, you know, and many publishers have become agencies of sort. Again, it's an overused word, kind of like saying data or digital. There's 1,000 different ways you can go to market as an agency. So in a way, we're competing against agencies for our ad revenue. But we're also partnering really well with agencies, maybe better than we ever have before. So that's an interesting relationship to manage. We're going after anyone that is looking for media, marketing, strategy, or advertising in the DMA that we're representing. And so that's against the big platforms. We're competing against direct teams. Many of the partners that we work with have direct sales organizations. And if we don't sign exclusivity agreements, we may be competing with the same company that we're sending millions of dollars to, as many publishers do. So it's against other publishers for that dollar, it's against the big platforms for that dollar, it's against the partners, and pretty much anyone nowadays that can open up an agency with a overcoat and selling watches out of the back of their trunk, or t-shirts in Freddie's case. They can all compete, really. And so you really have to, that's why owning that strategy in the QA, I think, is the point of distinction, because the product, I mean, we're all ultimately selling Google when you're selling search, or you're selling a platform. And so if you're going to be in that space, can you have the best QA and strategy team to own something and get a differentiation?
Eric, as always,
cool.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
man.
Thanks very much. And let's bring, Freddie, you ready? Okay, let's bring Freddie up. We're going to pivot into OTT and video. digital video and OTT. Freddie Godfrey, who I think many of you have already met, is Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at Scripps' company, Newsy. For those of you who do a lot of OTT like me, you may have noticed that Newsy's been doing some really interesting things. I've been seeing your little news bugs in between shows.
Oh yeah, I'll talk about that.
Little bits of informational trivia that aren't necessarily news related, but are just sort of informationally related that get the brand out. I think it's a really interesting use of the platform.
Yeah, I'm pleased to see that.
But part of his job at Newsy has been to help move the company from a desktop syndication model to an OTT model. He's going to kick off our discussion that's going to continue in the panel on the opportunities across of bringing video across screens, including OTT. So please welcome back Freddie.
Bright lights. Okay, video first. Little teaser.
Hey, Joni. One day I just went to the doctor and they told me that they were going to be leaving. Our mothers need to really be heard. We need more birth centers. I wish the hospital was still here. Now we have nowhere to go.
Cool. Thank you. So the reason I wanted to play that first is because we have the most unbelievable team of journalists at Newsy, and they never get enough credit for what they do. We have an investigative team who actually try to find problems and talk about them. And at Newsy, the reason I'm so proud to be there is because we actually raise topics and we find answers to those problems. And as a result, one of the reasons we've been so successful in the last couple of years is because we haven't gone out to try and influence people into what their opinion should be. We've just been out to inform them. And it's not just been about politics, it's also been about the problems that exist in the world. Another documentary we put out earlier this year is called Blowout. I would suggest anybody to try and find it. It actually won a few awards, and talking about the oil industry in this country. So anyway, so the reason I played that was because content, oh look, it moves. Content matters. And I'm talking about the fact that if you want to exist on the big screen, and that's what I'm here to talk about, and a lot of people know I've been talking about it all week, you can't just put any old dross up there. Like, you actually have to put something up there that's meaningful, something that is going to keep people sticking around. And the reason it matters so much is because this is where people are going. It's really that straightforward. Anybody who does their homework knows that YouTube, Google finally told people a couple of months ago that people spend 250 million hours a day consuming YouTube content on the big screen. And that was quite surprising. And so we made the decision in 2016 to completely pivot our business from being a desktop business, desktop syndication business, owned and operated, and bearing in mind that we started in 2008 as a tablet-first company. That was how we founded the business, into OTT. I tell people quite flippantly that we literally abandoned our entire other business. It's not true. We still have a property, and we still have a mobile app, but we haven't even tried to monetize it. In fact, we stopped deliberately monetizing it about 18 months ago in order for it just to be a vehicle to show people what it is that we're capable of doing. And we focused 100% on this. And it's proving to be pretty successful, but it was also really hard. It's a really dangerous place to go. A lot of people thought that you had to pay to play, but once you're there, you're going to be successful. The answer was no. You have to have the right content. You have to have the right mission. You have to have the right vision. You have to understand the market. And if you don't, honestly, there are so many swear words I want to say, and I won't. You're screwed. And a lot of big people, a lot of big media companies have actually lost a lot of money trying to bet big in OTT. And they failed because they didn't look and think about it first. But the opportunity is really there. Our growth has been rapid.
in 2 years, we have gone from being a very small business that nobody really heard of, that we were just about passionate people just wanting to find 60, 80-second stories about what was happening in the world. And during the course of the last election cycle, whilst we were making this pivot, people started to depend on us. And as a result, we became, last year, the fastest growing national news network in the country. Now, that's not difficult because everyone else is just flatlined. So it's kind of, you know, but the truth is that like it has been rapid. People are consuming us for an average of 40 minutes a day, which is a slide that's about to come up, so I've already ruined that one. And that's going on about what I was just saying a second ago. But as I mentioned, it's about the content. It's about actually looking at what people want and having your focus groups and realizing that people want both content they're going to consume on demand and stuff that they're going to have in like a linear format. About being on the big screen. It's not about actually giving them the Netflix experience necessarily. Netflix, in my opinion, came along and actually sort of ruined the landscape for a lot of people in that regard. They were like, right, everyone has to have a subscription, everyone has to be on demand. No, that's not true. So we started playing around. One of the things that we did to talk about current headlines is we, whenever you tune into the Newsy app or across any one of your devices, whether it's Roku, Apple Fire TV, Xbox, PlayStation, Vizio, Hisense, Samsung. By the way, my job is to distribute, so I'm just like pitching myself here. The first thing you get when you launch the app is you go straight into the linear feed, and the first thing you get is a 90-second update as to the top 3 things that have happened in the world in the last hour. And that shows people that what you're getting is relevant, and it's now, and you should stick around. And as a result, people do stick around, which I think, hopefully, nope, still not the next slide. People do stick around, and that's why we've grown. It's been terrifying how fast. We produce about 10 million impressions a day or more in the OTT space. A lot of it's on Roku, but we also are focusing on diversifying significantly to make sure that we appeal to the right audiences across the board. But again, that's another thing that you want to consider. Like, are you a Roku audience person? Are you a Fire TV person? And what should the experience be on each of them? Because they shouldn't necessarily be the same. And as a result of that and the investments that we've made in that, we've seen really rapid growth, and it continues to grow. And then as a result, we continue to double down. As you might also know, about 2 years ago, we launched a cable network. So Newsy, which sounds interesting for us to do as a digital-first company, but we're in 39 million homes. We're going to be in 45 million homes by the end of this year. And we actually use our cable presence and our digital presence to sell to each other. We offer a very different experience on both. Again, we understand and appreciate the fact that on cable, people are looking for one thing, and over the top, when they've got their remote control in their hand and they're having a beer and they don't, not having to pay for their whatever it is they're consuming, they want something else. But we do tell people who are on cable that they can come and find us on demand. And we do tell people that are on our OTT apps that they can come and find us on cable. And that's been extremely successful. And then as Steve pointed out, we have these little bites that come up. Anybody who consumes any kind of OTT has probably seen something called a Newsy Brief. Newsy Brief was an initiative that I started about 18 months ago. And it was designed to help elevate the brand and get it in front of people who we didn't want to sort of feel like they were being sold to, basically. And it's done pretty well. It crosses about 5 million impressions a day across the entire ecosystem. And we just give little evergreen little nuggets to people about really cool, interesting things, like penguins run for fun, and dolphins are the only other species that have sex for fun, whatever it is. Like something that's interesting and nice and completely irrelevant in the world of news. We stay away from politics in Newsy Brief, and we stay away from anything that is potentially divisive. But again, as I said, we're not a divisive brand, and it's been the biggest reason for our success. Still not that 37-minute slide. It's going to come, guys. We appeal to older people than we thought, which I think is really fascinating. We still try. We're a very millennial brand. We still try to, the average age of our newsroom is something like 28. Every year I have to add that number, but we were founded at the Reynolds Institute of Journalism by a guy called Jim Spencer, who just cared. He was like me, had terrible ADD, and didn't really have long enough to want to consume a story. And so our goal was to go after the millennial, but actually it's not just millennials who love our content. It's people who are sort of skewing a little bit older as well, which I think is really interesting because everybody's valuable. Hey, there it is. People stick around. We opened a pop-up shop in DC in 2016 to cover the election. Some people might know there was an election a couple of years ago. Small topic. And we did the thing that we cared about doing, which was just say, this thing happened, that thing happened. And whilst CNN was telling everybody that you should think this way and other people were telling you should think that way, we just said, no, like, this is just the news. And being owned by EW Scripps, who acquired us in 2014, it was helpful, because one, I call them like grandpa Scripps, like, you know, they're the benevolent granddad who come along and every year give us a giant check and say, hey son, go and do what you want, just don't get into drugs. Like, it's exactly how Scripps has run us. They are the example of the perfect acquirer. They really were. They just said, we're not going to change what you do, we're just going to give you the money to do it better and do it more. And one of the rules that they had was, you're going to stay, we're not unpartisan, we're anti-partisan. And when I was at the Dish conference a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago in Phoenix, a lot of people came up to me and they said, so what's Newsy? And I said, well, we're an anti-partisan news network. And everyone's like, oh, really? Yeah, sure, everyone's saying that. Like, all the other brands, all the other people who go left or right say that. And I said, no, that's fine. Look, go and watch Newsy and come back and tell me if I'm wrong. I said it to about 20 or 30 people, and over 3 days, nobody came back and told me I was wrong. And as a result, people are just so happy about that. People don't want to be told what to think. And we stuck with that. And it cost us a lot of money to do so, because it would have been very easy and very fruitful to go after a particular audience. But we just decided, no. We said, fuck that. Like, let's actually give people what they need. And people stick around. 37 minutes for a millennial news brand with 60-second stories, that's actually pretty amazing. And again, that's over the top. That's not desktop. That's people who turn on Newsy and they stream it. And one of the most interesting things that I discovered the other day, thanks to a friend of mine who was going through marriage therapy. It didn't end well, by the way. They're getting divorced. But he was in his therapist's office on a Monday morning, and he texts me, and I'm like, oh God, what's happened now? And he goes, thanks, Fred. I'm here trying to salvage my marriage, and all they're playing on the screen is Newsy. I said, that's actually fantastic. Congratulations. A lot of people run us out of home, and we never realized that until we started looking at all of the IDs that were consuming us. We have an awful lot. I crashed my laptop 8 times 2 days ago, looking at the average session times for every single install that we have on Roku. And a lot of people stream us for up to 4 or 8 hours a day. And it's because, again, they like us out of home. We're just unoffensive. And people come home and they turn us on, they listen to us in the background, and they make their gin and tonic, they have their domestic, but whilst doing all of that, they're learning about 5 or 10 things. So we've really capitalized on that, so we've kept our stories short, and again, we've kept the experience on over the top of the way that people want it. And one of the things that's really important with that experience is nothing to do with that, but is how to feed them advertising. So we're an advertising supported business completely. We are from 2016. We're going to make about 400% or 400 times more than we did 2 years ago in the desktop business, and that was one of the things I was going to come up here and talk about. I just remembered what I was meant to talk about. Was the reason we moved away from desktop is because we were sick and tired of all the fighting, all the infighting that happens in desktop. Whether, you know, when Google made its change from Flash to HTML5, we all lost our shirts. Whether there was more fraud, we all lost our shirts. Whether there was a shitty fill rate, we all lost our shirts. And we just got sick and tired of that. And we saw this green pasture in over the top. And we saw that also the need for good journalism. I'm just now putting the slide in randomly. And it was a success. That's all stuff. Well, actually, no. I mean, this is relevant. I mentioned that we do a different thing in cable to what we do in over the top. We broadcast for 17 hours a day for our cable business, and it's very successful. we keep our content diverse. Our talking heads are extremely diverse. We have a lot of people that you would consider to be a very dangerous kind of individual telling stories, because we're trying to be real. We're trying to relate. We're not a bunch of supermodels going on screen telling people what they want to hear. Like, we're actually telling the stories as they happen. And that was the point in Maternity Deserts and Blowout and a lot of the other documentaries. And I do encourage anybody to go and find our documentaries. They are fucking fantastic, and by people who just care. And so we consider, as I said, I mentioned our cable programming very differently to our over-the-top programming. But they do also tie in, which is good. And really, I mean, I think that's it. We made a big bet in 2016 by shutting down the only revenue stream that we had and focusing entirely on the other one. At the same time, that was when we launched into cable, so we didn't have that as a guaranteed revenue stream either. It was a good decision, but we made a lot of mistakes along the way. And luckily, we're a company that encourages ourselves and each other to share those mistakes. So if any of you are interested in getting into that space or think there's potential, my first advice is don't just launch in there. Even the biggest media brands in the world fail when they do that. And talk to people and ask the tricky questions and figure out how to do it cheaply to begin with. Test the water. And you'll find that there is probably an audience there. At the end of the day, there are 100 million people a month actively consuming content digitally on their big screens. And it's a good place to be, but just be careful when you do it. But when you do, there's a lot of reward. And that's it. Thanks.
Freddie, thank you so much. Stay right there. Hold your questions, because we're going to. Freddie's going to be joined by our panel with Damien, Sarah, and Dennis, because not everybody has a good old grandpa with deep pockets who can write them a check. So almost all brands who are thinking about video and thinking about video need to think about bringing video across screens and work a strategy that not only includes digital video and mobile, but also OTT and the various larger screen alternatives. To take up this topic, and by the way, I have a lot more respect for dolphins than I think I ever did before after that. But is Damien Slattery, who's the VP of Marketing at Fast Company, has been responsible for helping Fast Company grow its partnerships over 50% year over year. Damien came to Fast Company after a long career at Time Inc. that culminated in being the CMO of the SI Media Group. So please welcome Damien on our panel.
Hello. Come on, Freddie. Hustle.
I'm doing the Jason Tate slow walk.
Okay, so we're going to follow up Freddie's great chat about Newsy with three, including Freddie. Sarah, who is a wonderful seller at AccuWeather, and Dennis, who just gave me an amazing tutorial over coffee on Insider and how Business Insider has transformed itself in many ways, including with some OTT. Lightning round. Do you subscribe to Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime?
All of them.
All of them.
I subscribe to Netflix, and my wife subscribes to about 700,000 other things. And she pays.
I'm one of 6, so we split a lot.
There we go. As the big players like AT&T and the Disneys work harder to own and build streaming businesses, are traditional media partners going to fight harder and harder for that share of eye, share of mind in the OTT space? How much more competition will that be for traditional publishers, do you think? Dennis?
It's going to be tremendous. I mean, we're all going after the same share of attention, and people only have so much time in a day. I think the big thing is we're spending now like 12 hours consuming media, like with multitasking, with media and tech and everything else. There's not enough time for all the brands that want to enter that space. So for brands like Business Insider, we have to have a unique value proposition for that audience to want to like consume that content. We have to stand for something. We have to be differentiated. We have to have a unique voice, and we have to be offering and paying the audience back with really good content. So I think it's going to be a challenge for us. where our content is on there. It's ad supported. It's free for the consumer. I think it's going to be a challenge, as you mentioned, with all these other kind of like pay TV providers going back into getting into the OTT space with Warner Media and NBC Universal and everybody else that's about to enter the market in the next like 6 to 9 months.
Freddie?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'd add to that is that you're right. Like, at the end of the day, a pair of eyeballs can only be really looking at one thing at a time on the big screen. But also, what's needs to be remembered is that I don't remember the last time that I sat down in front of the TV and didn't have my phone in front of me. And so, you're right. Like, those 12 hours could be because it's 6 hours of being on your phone and 6 hours of watching telly, kind of thing. Like, there is a way to combine the two, and both of them are very valuable, and they're also very different things that require very different sort of experience for the consumer. But we do have to think about the fact that you are fighting for those minutes, and that you can't share them with anybody else. And therefore, we have to give them a value prop that they can't get anywhere else. And for us, it was just about, as I said earlier, it's just about being anti-partisan, giving them something where they weren't being fed. And that's what you have to do. The quality of the content, what you bring, has to be unique in the space. You can't just share or do something that someone else is already doing.
Sarah, in the pressure-packed craziness of RFPs and trying to be client solutions solvers for our advertising and marketing partners, I often have to calm my team down and tell them, okay, we're not curing cancer, we're not saving lives. In fact, AccuWeather saves lives. And you have a brand and a product that can be the difference between life, home, family, community, business. How great is that? How much different pressure is that for the quality of the content, for your selling process? Talk a little bit about how that roots and leads into the video product.
I think that's something that is this on? Oh, it is on. I think we're constantly talking about how it needs to be more relevant to our users, how our video needs to be. We're on your TV, we're on your computer, we're on your app, and the video we produce in each of those spaces needs to introduce so much about weather as part of everything you do. When you get up in the morning and when you're looking at what you need to wear, where you're going, what your commute's like, do I need to put my snow tires on? It's all about that, and I feel like video is lending itself to a really cool place for us because we can make really awesome content for advertisers around safety, around hurricane preparedness, around making sure that your car is ready we do really cool things with different apps for making sure that your car is up to date and if you're checking on things like that. And I think that's where we're really leaning into the video really hard on OTT particularly.
That's great. Dennis, talk about how the bit you told me where a little bit of experimentation on YouTube led to a major strategic shift for Insider, and how that evolved and has fed into OTT as well.
Yeah, like across social. Like, so 3 years ago, if anyone's not familiar with the Insider brands, we have 22 different verticals, from Insider Food to Insider Travel to Insider Beauty, looking for that white space where we can have a unique voice and really kind of engage an audience. What we found by just kind of like looking at how we tell these stories, when people engage, we launched some videos that became Insider Food, and then out of that we did a cheese video, and we're like, oh, millions of views, people like cheese. And then we did another one, we're like, holy shit, people love cheese. And then we had Insider Cheese, and then we did a show that we distributed across as a Facebook Watch show originally, like the Great Cheese Hunt, and that's become like a really big hit for us. So it's like, what can you learn by just kind of like experimenting and trying to go deep on really kind of like specific topics that might surprise and delight an audience? And that's one of the things that we try to do. And again, it's always a continuous experimentation, tweaking things, evolving, and seeing what works, and how can you replicate those formats for other categories where you think that you actually have an authority to speak about.
That's great. Freddie, I come from a magazine career, and I saw in April that Zinio has announced a Zinio TV OTT service for a whole host of magazines. At the very end of your chat, you touched on the differentiation between the content you were creating, or the strategy of content on desktop versus OTT. Could you unpack that a little further? Sorry, Eric, buzzword, unpack.
Gotta drop a couple.
Could you just stretch that out a little further? I'm very curious how us in content platforms, what do we have to charge our fellow colleagues with in terms of different thinking around the content?
It's in like sort of the different size of the screens that they're consuming it on, and the way that they're consuming it, right?
Well, you had a mix, a diverse mix of live,
Yeah.
long form, short form, series, et cetera, and
Well,
how that content mix and palette shifted from desktop, and what did that take internally to achieve?
Yeah, well, I mean, it took millions of dollars. That's number one. We have a beautiful new studio in Chicago. Seriously, but the first thing it took was trial and error, an awful lot of trial and error. And I think that anyone who's in the video space can appreciate that and speak to that. And I like insider cheese.
Yeah.
Who knew, right? Like that's the whole point, you know. And so what we did is we started feeding people content in all sorts of different ways and finding out what worked and what stuck. And you know, whether it was like, for example, you know, one of our top tips and secrets, as I'll tell you that luckily no one's watching or recording this, is there's a really big difference between 82 seconds and 84 seconds. And who knew? Again, so you know, so initially we would provide people with an on-demand only business, and then we would give people a linear only opportunity, and then we would give them a bit of the both, and we'd find out sort of just, you know, where things went. But it created all sorts of problems within our bureaus. So you know, we've got 5 bureaus now across the country, about 200 staff producing our content, which is again a very different place to where we were 2-3 years ago. And as I said, it's expensive to do, but it's worth making the investment, because you can't try an idea with something shit. Like, it has to be good. You have to try something with content that is the type of content that you would then want to carry on giving them. So that's really the only way I could really sort of unpack that. And by the way, Marvel, dude, I had no idea you're a Marvel fan, Eric, but I'll tell you about some of my Marvel comics, but it's
right.
Yeah, it's challenging, and as I said, it's expensive. But we did it by giving people a sort of a slew of all opportunities, and then just see where they start.
Sarah, AccuWeather is integrated into something like 200 TV stations, and in one manner or another, weather video feels like such it's not a leap. For your brand to be in video. It is the thing. How might you see it evolving to the benefit of both your audience and your marketing partners?
I think it's going to start evolving as oddly enough, we've been investing in a linear television network, which is a new thing for us, and I think that's become being able to sell that across multiple properties. You can see us on the TV, you can see video in the app, is becoming a really powerful sales tool. And I think there's obviously other weather vendors and opportunities, and we're not the only people in this space, but I think that is creating a really unique opportunity for us to be in so many screens is really powerful. And I think that's becoming like a really exciting new thing for us.
Dennis, in maybe Sarah's business, our brand, Fast Company, and yours, where Freddie's was organically, they just pivoted. They just said, we're going to be OTT. Mm-hmm. How do those of us who are many more things than just that one thing, how do we get there and get to success in OTT? And I'm going to take notes on your answer to this one.
Well, it's like I was talking with Freddie last night about this. There's a lot of experimentation. Like we're device agnostic. We run across all platforms. You know, we think we need to be everywhere where our audience is. We want to inform and inspire, and we think that we have a unique voice, and that's why that's important to us. As far as being successful, I think that it does take promotion, and one of the things for like a publisher like ourselves, it's you can get a little lost in the shuffle. There's a lot of noise in OTT, especially if you ever go through whatever kind of like a connected device you have. If you ever go through kind of like the catalog of providers, I mean, it's pretty long.
Can I just add
Yeah.
to that actually and just say, yeah, I mean, that's the biggest problem is assuming that you're going to be discovered on the big screen is a really terrible mistake. And it's
How do you overcome that?
with money and by just being by having money, but also by
To grow audience, scale,
so
promotion?
having money to promote, having something unique that people want, and doing it well. And so the issue is that a lot of people went into the to the sort of the app ecosystem. Let's say on Roku, which is a good example of this. Thinking, oh, I just build an app and it's going to be as successful as the app on my phone. And the question they didn't ask themselves was how people consume on their phone versus on their sofa. The point is that on their phone, let's face it, most people are consuming content when they go and sit on the throne. And they're not, that's because they have this little opportunity to do whatever they want. When you get home, you're not doing that. When you turn on your TV and you put your feet up, we're all consumers as well. I think it's very easy for a publisher to forget that they're a consumer. And you think about, what would you do? You don't sit there and scroll through a bunch of apps. You find the one thing that you want and you're going to stick with it until you then go and cook dinner and set off the fire alarm, and then you move on to something else. Like, for example, I watch like a show of something before dinner, I then have dinner, and then I might pick a movie after dinner. Like it's a different thing, but you're not consuming multiple things. So discovery is a very serious problem because there are 4,000, 5,000 apps on Roku, and so it's not just about being there, and it's not about your audience just installing you and putting you where you want them to be, because even then they're still going to want something different. You've got to produce something that is in line with what they're going to do at that time of day.
So we're media properties, right? We're content creators. Will brands begin to develop their own OTT channels? Will OTT become the new website for them? How far can this go? And will we end up competing more for the eyeballs again against Target's OTT service?
I mean, it's only growing, and I think one of the best sort of discoveries that we came across is the replication of the desire to have a cable-like experience. So honestly, what I would actually suggest to anybody who wants to get into the space is look at the cable world and where that was 20 years ago, and imagine that as being OTT today. And it's only going to carry on along a similar path, a parallel path. And as to brands, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be where you go there to shop, but what brands will do is what brands were doing on cable 20 years ago. The only difference being, one of the opportunities that's still being untapped is that the brands are going to be able to do a lot more targeting than they were. Like, this is not just about a DMA anymore. It's actually about knowing whose home you're going into. And I know that, I mean, we sell, as I said, like 10 or 15 million impressions a day. And some of our campaigns will run very broad, and some will serve 100 impressions with a big budget behind it. But they get into the houses that they want, which is different to what exists in the cable sphere.
And just to jump, one of the things that we saw in the OTT space, I mean, we're doing about 3 billion video views a month, and OTT is a tiny, tiny sliver. And we're probably doing more on YouTube, OTT, and Amazon Prime than we're actually doing on our own app that we launched. So for us, it's really understanding what the expectation of the audience is when they go on the specific platforms. Because people go to the YouTube for a very different reason than they go to Facebook, and then a very different reason than they're going to go to OTT as well. So it's making sure that the content that you feel that holds up for that. So for YouTube, it's about discovery. It's about it's like the Google functionality of search and asking a question, getting a video that answers that question. That's what we focus in on that platform. Facebook is more about the entertainment. It's more about reactive. People just see things and cool things, and so we kind of like it. So it's really important to have that really kind of engaging hook shot, as we call it, that image. So it's understanding kind of like the ecosystem and like what kind of content fits best for which. So our B2B is going to be all of our Business Insider content, YouTube. We don't really.
When I was at Time Inc. and Sports Illustrated, we became a part owner of 120 Sports, which has evolved into Stadium. It's owned by Silver Chalice, Sinclair, MLB, BAM Tech has a piece, the NHL, PGA Tour is Nick involved in 120, now Stadium. And they went all in with, I think it's something like 14 to 18 hours of live, and now classic games, live games, and it required an extraordinary commitment, and it only allowed Sports Illustrated to kind of say we're touching it. Fast Company 2 years ago launched OTT, and we're struggling to monetize. It's not our core strength, and yet we know. At the same time, I lived through the magazine world thinking the tablet was going to solve everything for us, and it was turned into a fiction. So how does this not turn into another tablet for brands like us versus those who are born of it, organic in it?
Well, my question to you is, are you struggling to monetize in the space because of a lack of supply, or because your people don't know how to sell it specifically?
Lack of scale, so that makes selling hard. Lack of resources to kind of fully commit to the platform. Those are some of the factors.
Yeah, but the reason I ask, and I'll stop taking up all the airtime here, but is because they're both problems, and people only want to buy in that space if you have a lot of scale, and we discovered that with Newsy Brief. We run Newsy Brief across a lot of publishing partners, and the people who give us a lot of scale are the people that we do the best with, and the people who don't are people who often get lost in the dust. But also it's about how to sell it. I mean, we have cycled through 2 entire sales teams learning how to direct sell OTT, and the biggest challenge that we have is the investment that's made in having to educate the buyer. It's surprisingly still such green territory for these people that the agencies and that lot, they still don't truly understand what it is, and as a result they don't even understand how it's being bought, how they're buying it, and they tend to shy away.
But Sarah and Dennis both have scale at their brands, enormous scale, but not in OTT yet, right? So
Right.
So how are you teaching the agencies? Like, who are you talking to? They're different teams. Sometimes I'll run into different, like, the same people don't buy banner ads that buy OTT. So I'm just they're disjointed, they're awkward email chains, and no one knows what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely, but I mean, how we teach, I mean, the first answer is like, 3 martini dinners, and
Can I go?
yeah, hell. But it's, I mean, so I don't work on the, I should mention, I don't work on the sales side of our business. I actually haven't sold a single impression in my life. I just produced the supply. But I sit, until I relocated to the Northwest, I used to sit 16 inches away from the people who do. And listening to the conversations they had, it was very clear that different agencies handle this whole thing very differently. Some people are getting people to represent everything, and other people have very, very siloed individuals who are trying to represent certain types of supply. And you have to be ready to have both types of conversations, as far as I can see, and be ready, therefore, to have to do 2-3 martini dinners if that's what's required. But it's only worth doing it if you do have the scale. I mean, but to be honest with you, it's also the one thing that we have also learned is it's not just about having tremendous scale, it's about having the right audience, and buyers really, really love that. And especially as we come up to another election cycle, which does very well for both our local properties at EW Scripts, but also for Newsy, is that the investments that are expected to be on the big screen and digitally are going to be very significant.
Are they asking to be like next to things contextually, or like how are you able to segment and target and break it all up that way?
No, they're not asking to be next to certain things contextually, because obviously, I mean, that's one thing to point out is it's actually incredibly hard to sell news. Especially, I mean, we're not a particularly hard news brand, but it is very hard to sell news. No, they're asking to be just in very, very specific places, and they can't do that in a cable world, which is why their money is moving. As far as cable's concerned, they can go to a specific DMA and that's it, but we can actually put them into a particular type of home with a particular type of user. There's a very different, like for example, an Apple TV streamer is very different to a Roku streamer. One of them spent $29, one of them spent $150, and that's a different audience.
Steve, you look like you have a question.
I wanted to ask Sarah about the kinds of formats that you're playing with in the video in the video platforms that you are playing in? Since you have content that could be very modular, but could also go long. So I'm curious about where you're already playing in video and what formats you're thinking about it as you start moving into different screens.
As we move into digital streams, I think a lot of what we have right now is very short form, and that seems to be everything's 30 seconds, it's very quick, but it's also a lot of like public interest. We don't do a lot of our real-time weather reporting is not on our digital properties. That's something that's on our news, those are something that is on our linear television. A lot more of what we're finding that we're producing and working on our digital properties is, it's something like where we'd produce like a custom D-Day and how weather affected that, or we'd produce something custom for the storms in Puerto Rico, and those sort of like long-form segmentings are working much better on our digital properties because they can last for longer. They're repeat views, so it's just like it's a totally different conversation. And I think as I learn, because I didn't know anything about linear television, so it's interesting that so much you can't look at them the same, but we are learning a lot in both places.
Dennis, talk a little bit about how you at Insider, as the business and the strategy has expanded. The cheese example, for example, how Insider TV, how you're running series, you're running long form, short form, and how that's kind of just exploded opportunity-wise, and what it means to the business, to ad sales and more.
Well, it's provided us with a lot of like insights to what audience want. We're continuously looking at the data. It's all kind of like audience driven. We're there to serve our audience, and so we will kind of like play with the formats. And once we find formats, we make sure that they're repeatable. So can I take something that we did from Insider Cheese? Can I take that over to Business Insider and tell a story about an ETF? Possibly there's some learnings in there. Surprises the heck out of a lot of people, but possibly there's learnings. Is this on? One of the things I wanted to touch on, what you guys were just addressing, and I think Sarah hit the nail on the head of like on the buying side, because we're both from the sales side. One of the things that we did is we bundled all of our video. So we're doing 3 billion video views across all platforms. So we bundled that up. We call it Insider TV. You can buy across demos. You can buy across categories if it's like Insider Travel or Insider Food if we had the scale. And that's what we're taking to market. And the challenge initially was empowering the buyers. People would be like, OTT, that's my TV buyer, I'm just a digital buyer. And really kind of empowering them to be future-proof, because they're gonna have to be able to buy this across all different platforms if they want to be relevant in the next like 5, 10 years. 2 years.
Any questions?
Yeah, do we have any final questions?
Brendan.
Yeah, Freddie, you mentioned some strong growth numbers over the last 2 or 3 years. I'm wondering for you and maybe for everyone else, of the OTT platforms, where are you seeing the most traction now? And then when you look in the immediate future, like where do you see the biggest opportunities for some of those platforms?
I'm actually incredibly pleased you asked that question, because it leads to something really important. We started our existence on Roku and saw such growth there that we sort of stopped focusing on the others. And as a result, my job has been for the last 2 years is the one word thing that's written on my desk, which is diversification. So right now, today, I would argue, and I'd hate for them to know this, but like 90% of our business is conducted on Roku. They have done, as a business, a really unbelievably good job of giving people the experience that they want. And with the launch of things like the Roku channel, within Roku, which is also extremely smart, we also exist. So, so again, like I talk about diversification, there are 2 forms of diversification, and then I'll answer where we see the growth in the future, if I remember. It's both in an owned and operated capacity, but also as a channel. So like a lot of people call apps channels, and that to me is just confusing, mainly because I'm quite stupid, but also because it's not a channel, it's an app. You have to treat an app like an app, and treat a channel like a channel. And if you don't, then you're completely ignoring what it is that the customer is going to be doing themselves. So we launched a channel called Newsy Top Stories, and that is again another 24-hour linear stream that is extremely expensive to program, but exists on the Roku channel, Pluto TV, soon to be launching. We haven't signed, so obviously not allowed to tell you, but on places like TV Plus. And Samsung have done again, that's a good example, again, of digital linear programming. The TV Plus has absolutely exploded in the last year. and their small team are running around with their hair on fire, unable to control the growth. And that to me is an interesting fact. So now to actually answer your question, Roku is where we still conduct most of our business. We have seen the most growth away from them on Fire TV, which again you have to respect is trying to create a very different type of experience for us consumer. So you have to factor that in and work that in and bring your content out with them in a way that means that you're going to be discovered, which is again like it's an investment of time. And that's where we're seeing the most growth. The other places I forged over the last couple of years is alliances with every single OEM, and putting us on all of the different native television platforms as well, whether it's Samsung's Tizen or Vizio or Hisense and all those folks. And some of them are ticking on quite nicely. I can see from our numbers that budget TVs is an interesting area of growth. Really fascinating, and the other reason why I think they're very smart people is because a lot of the premium TV makers, the glass makers, ignored, potentially I should say, they ignored the value of the fact that their TV was connected. They made it connected, and then they didn't care. They just focused on investing in the quality of the glass. And now they're all really upset with themselves because someone came along and told people to put a $29 stick into their $2,000 TV that was already connected to the internet. And they went, shit, like, why, like we've lost all that. And yeah, so some OEMs are growing, but particularly the budget ones, and in particular, in owned operated, Fire is our biggest area of growth right now.
Steve, should we wrap?
I think we do need to wrap.
Okay.
My lesson learned is we got to do this earlier in the summit next time. Guys, this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes.
We're gonna ping everybody to tune this one in in our video wrap that we do next week.
And then, not for inclusion on the internet, yesterday at golf, Nick, Anthony, and I approached the green on number 3, only to discover a severed head of a wild animal.
What?
We have photos of it. We need if there's a wildlife expert in the room, we need to identify what this animal actually was.
Put it on Newsy.
Yes.
Get it up.
It's newsy worthy.
This is going to get a lot of impressions.
Okay. Well, that's the strangest wrap we've ever had here by far. Damien, guys, thanks very much. We are going to wrap with an issue that's going to, I guarantee, is going to bite us all in the ass in the next year and a half, and that is privacy. As we start seeing what happened in Europe start migrating to the U.S. market, especially in recent California legislation that's really going to be taken up and seen as a model elsewhere in regulation, this is going to be a key topic. To talk to us now about the ways in which privacy compliance really can be an opportunity if publishers think about it more wisely, is Nick Potvin, who is the Senior Manager of Ad Product and Technology at PGA Tour. He sits at the nexus of these two worlds between revenue operations and legal. Please welcome Nick to talk to us about how privacy is about to become much more important to all of us.
All right, thank you. So there's been a lot of conversations recently and a lot of attention on privacy and data regulations. And most of these conversations circle around whether programmatic advertising is going to be somehow detrimented or is going to decrease with the use of data, and these regulations are going to constrict the ability to monetize data. And then on the flip side, you have the more legalese and fear-driven articles about the fines and the regulations and how to comply. And while both have some merit, my goal is to kind of talk more about the opportunities that building a compliance program can create. So I want to level set with just answering a fundamental question of what is privacy. Privacy is about giving people the right to choose what information they share with whom and when. So when you hear these things about these regulations are attempting to stop businesses from using data or trying to prohibit the collection of data, that's really not what the regulations are intending to do. The regulations are intending to just give the individuals the transparency to make the choice of whether they want to share that data or not. And to further that point, there was a recent study done by IBM that found that 81% of respondents say they've become more concerned with how companies use their data. 87% think companies should be more heavily regulated, and 89% said companies should be clearer about how their products use their data. Interestingly, though, 71% said that they would be willing to give up privacy to access certain technological features. And only 45% are actively going in and making privacy changes to protect their personal data. So this 45% of people are already the ones that are on Firefox, they've got ITP enabled, they're on the Brave browser. So this idea of when Chrome makes an announcement about blocking third-party data, these users are already doing it. There may be a slight change, but the ones that are fundamentally concerned about it are already making those technological changes. And that 71% are well aware that their privacy is somewhat being infringed upon, but they know there's a value consideration there that they're willing to accept. So by providing this choice to that 45% of users who are already actively sort of distrusting the ecosystem, you can help regain their trust. It helps you build your compliance program, because that's complying with the law is fundamental. But it also creates business opportunities. And the first opportunity I want to talk about is protecting first-party data. And we've talked about this a little bit throughout the conference. But prior to the regulations coming about, a lot of the conversations about use of data augmentation has been primarily a sales negotiation. The regulations allow for a conversation to be a little more pragmatic and talk about how either partner and their compliance posture is aligned or misaligned, and make sure that there's clean data flows. Knowing what data you have, where it's stored, and where it goes to, and this speaks directly to Article 30 of GDPR, which requires a data inventory. Outside of that, knowing this data is also going to increase the amount of revenue that you can drive from that data. If you know where your data is stored, you know where it's housed, you know where it's going, it's a lot easier to then monetize and leverage it in an IO or a BMP or however it's transacted upon. Lastly, CCPA allows for data subjects the right to opt out of selling of data. This clause has a ton of technical challenges associated with it, but it's important to note that in order to comply with a data subject request, pretty much everything we do is some form of value consideration of selling of data. So be mindful of that one clause on CCPA and have a mechanism or a way, or at least start conversations around how you would comply with that to purge that data if you needed to. One of the strongest tools in the compliance tool belt is a data processing addendum, and you may have seen these come out, in flurries leading up to the GDPR enforcement date. This is actually a legally binding agreement that defines who controls the data, who's the processor of the data, what that relationship is, and the exchange. There's terms around auditing, and obviously this is something that you're going to want to put through your legal department and get counsel on. But I would strongly recommend reading through these. You'll find some really interesting terms and be able to decipher how certain partners are considering that data use. To give one example, if you look at SSPs, I've seen DPAs that come across that one SSP will say that they're the data controller. I've seen other ones say that they're the data processor. I've seen some that outright say we're going to do digital fingerprinting. I've seen others that say we're cookie-based and IDFA-based, so it's resettable. And so having an understanding of that and just getting familiar with those terms will help you have the conversations with legal to say, these are the partners that we're considering vetting. Is this aligned with our compliance posture? Is it not? If we're more conservative, you may want to shy away from companies that are doing fingerprinting. If you're a little more lenient, you may want to go, you may be okay with the fingerprinting term. Obviously, the Chrome changes aside. This is just more as it relates to the use of data. And lastly, GDPR requires that not only are you compliant, but that all vendors that you work with are compliant. So these DPAs are essential to make sure that what you're documenting and what you're assigning to is in alignment with how your business is going along their GDPR approach. And one of the things I saw with GDPR was that there seemed to be a mindset that it was a project or a checkbox. It was, put a cookie banner up and I'm good, right? And the reality is compliance is an evolving process. It's not a project. It's not something that you can complete. It's ever changing. CCPA is likely not the last data regulation we'll see. We know there's already multiple proposed state laws. The New York bill is actually more stringent than CCPA. It reintroduces the concept of private right to action. CCPA has since amended that language out of the regulation. But New York introduces putting businesses who process data into a fiduciary role. which is the same thing you see when you hire a CPA to handle your taxes. You're expecting that they're gonna handle that information with your best interest in mind. And New York introduces that law as it relates to data processing. Washington and Texas has both been getting a lot of attention. It's more similar to CCPA, but watch how that plays out. The patchwork state laws it's untenable. It's not feasible to really deal with multiple state laws and multiple countries. So there's pretty active movement at the federal level to put something in place. The one that's getting the most attention and the most traction is one called Detour. And this actually focuses on dark patterns, which is a UX concept by which you create mechanisms to psychologically manipulate the user to consume more media on your platform. So this looks to regulate that, and it strengthens the COPPA law, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. But there are some privacy terms regarding how you can use data to do A/B testing with content and targeting. So it's not quite in the privacy realm, but it's definitely one to keep your eye on. And then the other two that are getting the most attention is the Data Care Act, which has the most support in the House right now. And Do Not Track Plus is another one that's been floated out. Candidly, this one's a little bit of a head scratcher for me because the Do Not Track kind of flamed out because it's very difficult to pass that string across all partners and get publishers to adapt it. The other problem with Do Not Track is that it's very difficult to enforce a regulation when the settings are set at the browser level and you're regulating companies at the site level. And this exact same, it wasn't called Do Not Track, but this exact same principle was introduced in GDPR. There was supposed to be another regulation that came out. It was called the e-privacy regulation. You may have heard the e-privacy directive, otherwise known as the cookie law. That was supposed to roll out at the same time as GDPR, and the technical mechanism was one of the two major hiccups as to why it didn't roll out. And there's also private lobbying at the federal level. And in fact, CCPA is really the way that bill came to be passed as quickly as it did was due to lobbying. That was a ballot initiative that Silicon Valley rallied behind and went to the governor and said, we need to tone this down because it was very heavy-handed on the civil action. So they condensed that down. So there's very active private lobbying. Both IBM and Google have proposed frameworks to Congress. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit now and talk about one approach, and this is what we do at the tour, of how you kind of create this compliance program. And it creates an opportunity for cross-collaboration, not only across business units, but across the multiple tiers. So we have it structured as we have a steering committee at the top, which is obviously senior leadership, both from a technical perspective and a non-technical perspective. And they're looking at they're meeting quarterly, looking at policy suggestions. They're obviously the sponsors, so that any policies we try to put in place have a little more teeth behind them. And they serve as an escalation point. So moving down to the compliance working group, we have it structured that we have a representative from myself in revenue operations. We have legal. We actually have an internal auditor in there. We have our head of security, and we have records management and retention. And so oftentimes as we're working through how we're going to do things, it's very different approaches. So sometimes we need that escalation point. And so the steering committee can provide that guidance. And what the compliance working group does is we're really the ones that are having our ear to the ground of all of the upcoming regulations, what's changing, how it's going to impact our business, and we're proposing policies to the steering committee. So we're looking at our business and we're looking at how we can, obviously comply with the law first and foremost, but secondly, do the least amount of disruption to the operation. We meet bi-weekly. We're constantly in contact. We're trading articles back and forth, bouncing ideas off each other, and multiple projects in the roadmap. And then lastly, but arguably the most important group, is the privacy ambassadors. And these are individuals at the business unit who these policies are actually impacting. So we work with them as we're rolling out new policies. They're the first ones to see it and sort of raise their hand and say, yeah, that's not going to work for us because of X, Y, and Z. We need to do things one way or the other. They're also going to be the ones that are going to say, hey, we're changing vendors on how we store our PII. Like, we need to go through a vetting process. So to circle back to that concept of the data inventory, without the privacy ambassadors, it's nearly impossible to have that complete. So having this full chain of command and communication really helps drive a compliance program that's integrated into the culture of the organization, because no one person can run compliance. It's not a legal problem. It's not a RevOps problem. It's not a marketing problem. It's a company-wide problem. And so the solution has to have voices from all ends. And I'm just going to end with this, and this is, if GDPR was sort of not a concern because EU traffic was low and CCPA and the US regulations are the first year kind of dealing with this, these are the first steps that we took and that I would suggest taking. The first is a privacy impact assessment, and what that is a questionnaire that it's essentially a gap analysis. You look at your organization and where there may be potential gaps, and there's plenty of templates online. There's also some great companies that do third-party audits on this. So if you're interested, let me know, and I'm happy to provide some resources. Obviously, if you're going to go that route, you need the key stakeholders, and this is people that are touching the data, controlling the systems, as well as who it's going to potentially impact if you change processes. Create and update the data inventory. I spoke about that earlier. And then create and update policies. Policies aren't fun. They're not fun to write. They're not fun to read. But having something formally documented and in place will really help steer the compliance program. And also, worst case scenario, if you are dealing with a supervisory authority, you have something to point back to. And then lastly, stay ahead of the new or changing regulations. This space is one of the more rapidly moving that I've ever seen in terms of regulations. There's a lot of attention for, and really it was kind of the perfect storm with GDPR rolling out at the same time as the election, and it really, privacy just kind of got pushed to the forefront. And it's also fairly low-hanging fruit for a bipartisan bill to get put through. So obviously at the state level and federal level, things are changing pretty rapidly. So just stay up to date on it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Nick, thank you. Yeoman's work. Last man up, and I appreciate it. I have two quick questions.
Sure.
How realistic is that we're really going to get an alphabet soup of different regulations? Is there a lot of momentum around using CCPA as sort of the model that's going to just extend and be adopted in one form or another, either at a national level or elsewhere?
Yeah, so that's right now the CCPA is the benchmark. The House has already come out and said that they will not preempt anything. They will not pass any bill that preempts CCPA. So as of right now, assuming all things stay equal in the next election, that'll be the baseline. Obviously, the climate in Washington is a little volatile right now, so I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we see multiple states before the feds move.
There's also an interesting clash that's evolving regarding the telcos, because the telcos now are owning the digital properties. They have their own set of rules, privacy rules. Do we have any sense of how all that's going to mishmash together? Because they've got the telcos have a whole boatload of information, and they're under a whole set of rules already. Right. But now they're owning a good hunk of the internet.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. One is that so the Maine just passed a law and that specifically requires ISPs to gain confirmative consent. So it's starting to get a little heavily regulated. The congressional hearings that I've heard seem to push in favor of letting the FTC regulate privacy. So whether that happens or not, and not to bring in a whole other topic, but net neutrality, one of the big debates was who regulates that? Is it the FCC or the FTC? And with the repeal, with it no longer being a Title II utility, if that remains and everything can roll into the FTC, I think that would be the ideal. That's total speculation.
Yeah,
that's not,
yeah. But that's how.
Yeah.
Which may delay a lot of this,
right,
too.
Right.
Is that there's really like a fundamental question at the upper level of where this is going to be regulated.
That's right.
And the telcos actually confuse everything.
Yeah,
make it right.
For sure.
Nick, thanks very much.
Thank you.